Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Federation Hall. If you haven't met me before, I'm David Sequeira, and I'm the director of the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery here at the Victorian College of the Arts, University of Melbourne. And a big welcome to everybody who's in Zoom land, as well as everyone here in Federation Hall. And before I introduce our guest speaker, I invite you to ground yourself in the deep knowledge that long before the Victorian College of the Arts was thought about, or the University of Melbourne was considered, that the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation practiced dance and song. They made paintings, they made sculptures, they practiced healing, and they shared stories on this very land. And it's with great joy and honour that I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. Our guest speaker today, Chantal Faust, is Professor of Contemporary Art and Head of Contemporary Art Practice at the Royal College of Art in London, where she's been based since 2010. From 2003 to 2009, she was a lecturer in critical and theoretical studies here at the VCA, where she also completed her BFA in photography, honours, Master of Fine Arts and a PhD in Fine Arts in 2009. As an artist and writer interested in absurdity and haptic aesthetics, her scanning, performance, painting, video and installation works have been exhibited at venues including Gallery Tom in Tokyo, the Freud Museum in London, Heide Museum of Modern Art, the National Gallery of Australia, Westbund Art Centre in Shanghai and Lichee One in London. She is a legend here at the VCA. Wherever you are, please make Chantal Faust very, very welcome.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you everyone for coming. It's really, really special and exciting to be here. I did used to teach here and study here. I also used to have the privilege of coordinating the Art Forum back in 2006 to 2009. I looked it up this morning, and I wish I had all the files of all the brilliant speakers we had at the time, but we weren't in this beautiful theatre then. We were in the shed across the road, but I loved doing that. I loved coordinating the Art Forum and the opportunity to bring people in. And it's something I think that's really informed my teaching since then. So really special to join you here, especially for this. I've put together a kind of collage of things. It starts off with a bit of a performative writing piece that I wanted to share. And then I look at a couple of recent exhibitions. And then I thought I might finish just speaking a little bit about my work at the Royal College of Art in London. And then I think there'll be some time for some questions at the end. There's already an eager one in the chat. Okay. She said, "What was that you said?" I said, "Who said?" She said, "You said." I said, "Who, me?" She said, "Yes, you." I said, "Not me, I'm dumb." She said, "What was that you said?" I said, "Who said?" She said, "You said." I said, "Who, me?" She said, "Yes, you." I said, "Not me, I'm dumb." She said, "What was that you said?" I said, "Who said?" She said, "You said." I said, "Who, me?" She said, "Yes, you." I said, "Not me, I'm dumb." A noise, an oyster, but a noisy noise annoys an oyster most. So these are two of the three things that my father has taught me, and they're both tongue twisters. The first is more obscure than the second, and I can't find its trace, but it's hugely unlikely that he made it up. So I presume that it came from somewhere. The third thing that my father has taught me is another tongue twister, one that is much more obscure than the second and even the first. In fact, it's quite nonsensical. A made-up language that scratchy memory tells me was something that perhaps his own father had passed down to him. And it goes, Malakutsi drama, Kulamuchi Uchi Achai, Kalamazuka, Ukimu, Ukipiki, Rumimu, by Jaime Eichel Ben Pipik. And when you say the lines by Jaime Eichel Ben Pipik, you're meant to jerk your head as in a particular way. And it sounds as though it might be a combination of Hebrew and Yiddish, but it's not, though certainly the last line by Jaime Eichel Ben Pipik is a nod to the Ben, or the son. Ben is the Hebrew word for son, and it forms part of many Hebrew surnames, Ben David being the most common, son of David. I am not the son of David, but I am the daughter of John. But John, but is the Hebrew word for daughter. I am but John David Faust, and being the daughter of Faust has other connotations. So maybe it's because it's my first trip back home for over 3 years, but I wanted to start off with sharing some thoughts about inheritance, about what is passed on from one generation to the next, and also what is omitted or perhaps was never there to give. When I told my sister about writing a talk that includes the "she said, what was that you said, I said" quotation, she responded, "I'm not sure how I feel about you sharing our family heirloom." So from our paternal side, my sister and I were given a series of tongue twisters. From our maternal side, we were given a history of suffering and endurance. Both of these sides are difficult to voice, one for its slippery syllables and one because it's too hard to speak about. I'm not sure if I can really enter into a dialogue with the past, and I have some ethical quandaries about this kind of ambition. What gives me the right of this gesture of presumed empathy, of renewal? What gives me the right to voice? It's a difficult tear between illuminating the shadows so as not to forget and just forgetting. Adorno famously wrote that poetry is impossible after Auschwitz, and this quotation has famously been misinterpreted over the years. Meanwhile, Paul Celan's incredible death fugue seeps, and the sound that you hear in a moment, it will be Paul Celan reading his poem.
Todesfuge. Schwarze Milch der Frühe, wir trinken sie abends, wir trinken sie mittags und morgens, wir trinken sie nachts, wir trinken und trinken. Wir schaufeln ein Grab
Scoop out a grave in the sky where it's roomy to lie. There's a man in his house who cultivates snakes and who writes when it's nightfall, nach Deutschland, your golden hair, Margarita. He writes it and walks from the house, and the stars all start flashing. He whistles his dogs to draw near, whistles his to appear, starts us scooping a grave out of sand. He commands us to play for the dance. Like milk of morning, we drink you at night. We drink you at dawn time and noontime. We drink you at dusk time. We drink and drink. Chaime Eichel Ben Pipik. So Pipik is a Yiddish word that is often incorrectly translated as being a penis. It actually means a navel. Pipik is a belly button, but it is perhaps an interesting mistranslation from belly button to penis, a kind of silencing of the umbilical connection or a cutting of the cord. So what happens then when the penis speaks for the navel? What does it mean to be Ben Pipik, son of penis, versus Ben Pipik, son of the belly button? And where is the but in all of this? The daughter, the she who asks, what was that you said? The she who declares herself as dumb. So the declaration of the state of dumb is of interest in my practice. And I've been dwelling in the dumb for a number of years. So there are dumb paintings and dumb pictures and dumb videos and dumb performances. And in a way, it's a kind of continual fight against pretense, but it's not just that, it's also because I am genuinely enamored by the literal, by surfaces, and by the absurd. I've been ventriloquizing the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek for a number of years. I've made videos, long videos, repeating his words, and I've painted Žižek, small and large. But every time I've tried to be Žižek, I've always been me being Žižek. And that little act in the ventriloquy game is important, to me at least. Rather than referencing obscurely, why not just point at something that someone has said? Al Held famously declared that all conceptual art is just pointing at things. And I really like this thought. Pointing makes us look. Perhaps it also makes us respond to what we see. It's like that moment of conscious awakening that Albert Camus describes in his book, The Myth of Sisyphus. He writes that it happens that the stage sets collapse. Rising tram, 4 hours in the office or factory, meal, tram, 4 hours of work, meal, sleep, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, according to the same rhythm. This path is easily followed most of the time. But one day the why arises and everything begins in that weariness tinged with amazement. Begins, this is important. Weariness comes at the end of the acts of the mechanical life. But at the same time, it inaugurates the impulse of consciousness. It awakens consciousness and provokes what follows.
Henry? Oh, Henry?
Yes, Liza?
Did you fetch the water?
Go fetch the water. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole.
Well, fix it, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. Oh, fix it, dear Henry, fix it.
Hopefully you could hear that, but that was the wonderful Harry Belafonte and Odetta singing their duet based on a children's song, which involves a protracted conversation between two characters who are discussing a leaky bucket. As with Camus' collapsing stage set, it's an absurdist tale of labor that leads to nowhere, or rather labor that leads us back to where we started, and in this case, to the hole in the bucket that can't be fixed with straw because the straw is too long, and the straw can't be cut because the stone to cut it with is too dry, and the stone can't be sharpened because in order to do so, it needs to be wet, and that requires water that needs to be fetched. But there's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, there is a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole. So There Is a Hole in the Bagel was my last pre-COVID exhibition, and it took place in 2019 at Gallery Tom, which is in Shibuya, Tokyo. And Tom stands for Touch Our Museum, and the gallery has one of the world's largest collections, if not the world's largest collections of Braille art books. Visitors to the gallery are welcome to touch the artworks. So as someone with a long-standing interest in touch and haptic aesthetics, it was curious to be invited to show there, along with the Chinese artist Rudy Mu. And we collaborated on the neon piece that you can see in the image on the right. Curious because it also made me very conscious of the fact that while a lot of my works are about touching, about visualizing the process of touching using scanning machines, the works often are not very tactile themselves. It's more like a skin's eye view of things than a touch. So I started using flatbed scanners to make images when I was a BFA student in photography here at the RCA. And I think before that, I was deconstructing Polaroids. And from memory, we had one computer in the department at the time. And I remember scanning some plastic flies, and I couldn't find those images for today's talk. So here is a more recent scanner work, and it's from a series called Plant Life. But it was really surprising for me, coming from the lens and a language of depth of field, to see such clarity combined with such proximity in the scan. It defied any sense of lens-based vision. The eye or the lens cannot see on the surface. To do so would be like trying to stick your finger into your eyeball, something painful and potentially blinding. The images you see here are also all made with flatbed scanners, and it's a couple of pages from a chapter that I contributed to the recent Data Loan publication. And the chapter is titled Headwind, a Scanning Story. And it's a chapter of images with no words. So it is a physical publication, but it's embedded with QR codes and AR codes. And my work linked out to a short moving image piece that does contain words in the form of a narration. So yeah, I think it was in my second year of the BFA here when I started scanning. And when I was in my third year, a decision was made to give photography students studios for the first time. So photography students hadn't had studios before that. And my work entirely shifted because of it. I started making things. And I'm quite interested in this idea of how we work with constraints and expand to fit inside the limit edge of a thing, to fit inside the spaces afforded to us, like a kind of human polyfiller. And it's not unlike thinking about the constraints of the A4 glass bed of a flatbed scanner in terms of what can be made to sit within its frame, or how for a number of years I made work to fit in the boot of my car so that nothing could be more than 180 centimeters wide. And I've done quite a bit of work thinking about constraints in relation to writing as well. And of course, there is a long tradition of doing so. This anchor that you can see on the screen is a book project that I was involved in, and it was led by the artist Joe Graham. And he invited 14 artists to respond to the question, what is an outline? And each artist was given a template, which was basically a thin black frame running along the edges of a white sheet of paper, so basically a border. And we had to fill in the gaps. And I'm going to read to you now a short text called Thinking Through Outline, which was my response to the question of outline. And the images that you'll see on the screen are the acrylic paintings of heads that were my contribution to the book. It's a little bit of an obscure text, but it's thinking about the relationship between impulse and knowledge, or thinking about what comes first, the head before the heart, or vice versa. So this is Thinking Through Outline. What it all comes down to, I think, is through. It is this channel that goes both ways and from one side over to the other, and it is a thorough going over and a duration and a connection and a cause and a termination and a beyond. And how at any given moment you might choose to understand through as an intersection or a passageway or a viewing platform to, from, and between thinking, and together how this thinking through might then be played out or transmitted. Depending on how you look at it, thinking through could privilege the thought process and announce that what is happening here is a study, a consideration, in which all things are taken into account and accounted for. Or it could be that this entire process of thinking is being translated, given another means, one that may have nothing to do with thinking at all, because thinking has surrendered and can only be thought of through that which it is thinking through. Can a thought be traced? Can the process of thinking be translated or siphoned or even understood to be changing directions, or able to be converted into something else so that it continues to describe its own process, like an out-of-body experience? But a thought has no body, which is why it lends itself to such thinking, and however way you look at it, it can change like that to mean something very different, and again through thinking and through thinking about this thinking. So which is coming first, the outline or the thought? And now and then, the closer you think about thinking, the further the process of thought becomes. Now our thinking about thinking is about thinking, and it is here where the thought and outline become thoroughly interchangeable, simultaneous even. But all this thinking, and the attempt to trace this thinking in order to render it visible is elusive. The outline is outlined. Now it looks like something, a face perhaps. Through resemblance or routine, the outline steers the next thought, Thought follows the line, but it is no longer thinking through it. Thought is felt to be elsewhere. The moment you stop thinking about it, there it is. What was that thought? A paused playback of strange collisions stuck in a 1-second memory, and now here we are thinking about thinking again and wondering, what could we have possibly been thinking? The outline, when applied to a thought, also cuts it off from wherever it was going. What is made visible can be faintly traced backwards to wherever it might have come from, not too far away. But this visible line erases all future of the thought, except that which is determined by the outline as it was thought about. We could always try and take a guess, try and read the lines like a map of interruption, somewhere in between the exquisite corpse and choose your own adventure. Symptoms identify their causes, but not their futures. The outline that holds thinking retains its mystery still, because in the process of rendering a thought immortal, it was killing it at the same time. Holding on to thinking, whatever we can grasp, may help us to understand a moment of thought, the thinking of which will never be fully understood. Now visible, it has disappeared without a trace, except for the outline that reveals its capacity, a still form that gives nothing away. And here are a couple of different iterations of this thinking through outline work. The event on the top of the screen, which was at Lychee One Gallery, involved live painting as part of a 2-person exhibition with the artist Esther Teichmann. And for the Freud Museum, I was invited to take part in an exhibition which was called Solitary Pleasures. So it was looking at masturbation, eroticism, and desire. And it was a chance to revisit quite an old work. Actually, it was a work that was made when I was still here as a student. It's a scanner-made image of a figure sucking their thumb in a black void. It's in the image on the left. So alongside that work that I was revisiting was some of the head paintings that I've just shown you, and also a new series of thumb drawings that were accompanied by 10 haikus. And I think that there is something that connects the Polaroid and the scan and these rapid head portraits and the haiku and the aphorism, in that they're all concerned with immediacy and representation and its undecidability. And in this case, actions of painting and actions of writing share attributes of brevity of line, form, expression, in the attempt to respond to an encounter with a subject. It's just an opportunity to put up a picture of my cat, Mitzi, with apologies to his sister, George, who's not in the photograph. But I thought I might just segue here into critical and theoretical studies. So when I was in my second year of the MA here, I remember hopping onto a plane to Hobart with my then partner and getting a phone call from Ted Colles, who was running the CATS department, asking if I would do some teaching into the first year of the BA during the next academic year. And when I told the then head of photography, Chris Collar, that I was going to be working in critical and theoretical studies, he said, "What do you know about art history?" And he had a point, given that my knowledge of art history was mainly through studying at art school. But my approach to teaching CATS, which was from the position of an artist teaching art history, informed my approach to teaching since. And I went on to spend a few years running the Critical and Historical Studies Department for Fine Art at the RCA in London. So that's how I got into teaching. And I haven't really stopped since that phone call from Ted, which was way back in 2003. And I thought I just might finish today's talk by speaking to some of the work that I've been doing lately at the RCA, where I've been based since 2010. So yeah, I've worked across a few areas at the RCA, CHS, which I just mentioned, and I've been very involved in the PhD program in the School of Arts and Humanities, where we have over 100 PhD students in our school. Just before I took on the current role that I'm doing at the college, I was lucky to be given this opportunity to rewrite this our core curriculum that we share across our MA programs in Arts and Humanities. So if you're not familiar with the LCA, it's a solely postgraduate institution. So MA, MRes, MPhil, PhD. So thinking about the urgency of the arts started with this PhD conference that I organised at the college in 2019. And since then, it's been rolled out as the umbrella theme for our school-wide teaching. And also it was the theme of the most recent issue of the Prova Journal that I edit. And you can see the cover on the right. We just launched that 3 weeks ago. We just launched the physical copy 3 weeks ago. The digital copy was launched during COVID. So yeah, in an odd way, I think this question of urgency, this urgency of the arts, is linked to thinking around absurdity. And one of my favorite lines from the Camus text that I mentioned earlier is in the chapter from The Myth of Sisyphus on artistic creation, where Camus writes that the role of the artist is to give the void its colors. And I might just share with you the quote because it's really nice and a bit hard to understand that sentence out of its context. So Camus writes that art can never be so well served as by a negative thought. Its dark and humiliated proceedings are as necessary to the understanding of a great work as black is to white. To work and create for nothing, to sculpture in clay, to know that one's creation has no future, to see one's work destroyed in a day while being aware that fundamentally this has no more importance than building for centuries, this is the difficult wisdom that absurd thought sanctions. Performing these two tasks simultaneously, negating on the one hand and magnifying on the other, is the way open to the absurd creator. They must give the void its colours. So give the void its colours is quite a beautiful notion, one that exemplifies Camus' stance that we must not have hope, yet cannot anguish over the hopelessness of it all. We should live without appeal, he says, but it's a great question. How is it possible to colour in the void? How do we colour in a lack or openness or a vacuum? Camus was very careful to be clear that he certainly was not suggesting that art should become a sterile illustration of absurd notions. But he did believe that if we were to accept absurdity in the real world, that it must not be denied in an artist's fictional world. And he wrote that for the absurd artist, it's not a matter of explaining and solving, but of experiencing and describing. So returning to this question of urgency and the urgency of the arts, it was really about questioning what arts and humanities practice and research has to offer in our current socio-political climate. And by this, I don't mean how might our work be instrumentalized or applied, but rather how it might lead our interactions with and understanding of the world. And this line of questioning has continued into my current role at the LCA. So since the start of 2020, I've been the head of the Contemporary Art Practice Program. And just to give you a little bit of context of that, so it sits alongside the more traditional MA programs at the LCA, so painting, sculpture, print, photo. But it attracts artists who don't want to be defined by a particular medium or its histories. And there's a real focus in CAP on social and political practice. We've got a lot of artists working with performance and moving image, but really working with and across all sorts of media and forms of expression. And we do quite a lot of events. So the hybrid reality poster you can see there is from this year's CAP Festival, which is something that's very much student-led, supported by the program, involves lots of external collaborators. And this just launched before I came here. I put the address up there just in case you might be interested in seeing some of the CAP artists' work. I think I might be at time. So I'm going to say thank you again to David and Sonia as well for the invitation. And thank you for listening.
Right. Thanks so much, Chantal, for taking us through that whole journey from here right through to the work that you're doing in London. We've got time for questions, and we're going to have questions. June, where are you, June? Oh, she's right up the front. She's got a microphone. If you've got a question, you won't have to come up to the front. You won't have to come up to the podium, but if you just raise your hand, June will come across. And if you're in Zoom land and you have a question, if you could use the Q&A function in Zoom, I'll monitor the questions for Chantal. So is there anyone who has a question? Yeah, please, just over there behind you, June.
You were talking about your interest in Zizek at the beginning. I was wondering whether it was you were mostly like in terms of your work, if these like psychoanalytical, like political opinions kind of impacted your work, or whether your like what your opinion is of his thoughts on contemporary art. Yes.
It's a good question. I think makes me think of also about the time of a reference and that things change. So I remember when I was doing my PhD, his book, The Plague of Fantasies, was really influential. I think it was written either in the late 1990s or early 2000s. But there's a section there where he talks about the postmodern fetish. And I think he uses the example of bloopers or the making of videos that used to get on DVD. So it's quite technologically dated, but it was relevant to something that I was interested in with scanning. But then it kind of shifted from Zizek, the theorist, because I did start finding some of his views questionable. It became more about Zizek, the figure, and the presentation of the self. And I did have the opportunity to see him speak in London a couple of times. So I kind of got to observe in person. And it just started off, I think I was listening to a lecture on headphones and just started repeating what he said. And it's the process of repeating, of kind of almost theft of words, but also not imitating his accent necessarily, but when somebody like him speaks off the cuff, it goes everywhere in multiple directions. It's really hard to follow. It's kind of almost stressful, but it made me think about the connection with the inheritance, I think. I was thinking about being force-fed ideology, or being force-fed words or histories or thoughts, and you don't know what's going to come out of a person's mouth, especially when you're repeating what they say. My question rambled too, but I hope that answered it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. I really enjoyed the lecture, and I really enjoyed the performance, and it's brought me around to thinking that you perhaps had a few ideas about this thing that is going around. It's been going around for a while, and there are a few major international exponents of the lecture performance. And I'm just wondering if you thought about where you sit within that. And, I guess there's a field.
Yeah, it's a good question. Always terrifying when Hubbard asks you a question. from my first interview, the photography, 1998. Still getting over it. Yeah, I think. I'm going to answer it slightly obscurely and just saying, like, one of the things that I've been really interested about with CAP and contemporary art practice is because we're going through a process now where we're rewriting our whole curriculum across the university. So I've really had to sit down and think about what we're trying to do in CAP and contemporary art practice. And I just feel really lucky to be in that community at the moment, because it's speaking those crossovers, those categorizations are really useful for me as well. So, I do see PowerPoint as a kind of art form. I love working with PowerPoint. And there are so many kind of moments of crossover where today, honestly, was the first time I've ever done the performance and more of the bio thing together. So I've done performances as standalone things and artist talks as standalone things, but it just seemed like a really nice opportunity being here, coming home in a sense, to merge them in that way. I think for me, there's certainly a performative side to my writing, but I think there's also a performative side to scanning. And sometimes you don't see things until, so I'm trying to publish a book at the moment, but if I have time to write it. And you send when the whole process starts, you send off the manuscript and it gets anonymous reviewers. And one of them, this is years ago now, but one of them said that the book is like Marmite, because we're in the UK, book is like Marmite, you're either going to love it or want to throw it against the room, across the room, which I thought was a great physical reaction to it. But he presuming gender there, but they described a quite performative approach to the writing. And I hadn't really thought about it at the time because I thought I'd put in quite a, measured abstract, but even in that excerpt, there was evidence of that. So it's like the distinction between, not really seeing also the distinction between kind of teaching, making, being, all of it's wrapped into one. And it's not like you're putting on different heads, to do each maneuver. So it does all seep into the rest. But I have, here obviously as well, but at the RCA, they had an opportunity to do lots of lectures and events over the years, so to kind of test it out with a live audience, which is really useful. Yeah. Thanks.
I've got a question that's coming from Zoom, and the question is, how important is the shift in photography from print exhibitions to virtual reality games? Do you see this as being the way ahead of the future, i.e. the death of the white cube and the birth of mobile phone art?
Yeah, it's a big word, photography. So I think that, we have artists who are really interested in the materiality of the image, and that's not just a post-COVID response, but so I don't know that I would respond in a kind of blanket way of it's kind of necessarily death of the white cube. I'm reluctant to use the word expanded practice as well, but maybe can I respond to it in a slightly different way, in that because I'm not so embedded in thinking about photography at the moment as some of my colleagues in the front row here would be, but I did start out studying photography, and I do think that it does have an impact on how you make things, like in terms of I started thinking about art in terms of depth of field and, I don't know, Harry Menken's own systems. When I'm painting or performing, it's all about this kind of pressure on the glass or the thing that's facing the image. And I think that is a photographic language, even though it's being expressed in other means. So I think maybe to answer that question, it's seeing how the photographic translates beyond the white cube into the world of the screen. Yes, I might answer it like that. Hi, Kate.
I think you just touched a little bit on my question, which might come across a bit like a ramble, but when I think about your practice, the words pleasure and pressure are always kind of front and center for me. And when I sort of go tracing back through and I think about the thumb, the suck, the assertions of pressure at the surface of the standing aid, the pressure at the edge of the frame. And I'm sort of really interested in how you draw out contours of pleasure and pressure, if that's appropriate, in relationship to notions of the void and emptiness, which you've spoken to in terms of kind of artistic, creative gestures and practices.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my PhD was called Pleasure Machines Towards a Philosophy of Scanning. And I used to say that after doing my MA, I had enough kind of thinking about desire. So I didn't want to spend 4 years wanting to move to pleasure. But I think the interest in absurdity really was developed during the PhD. It was oddly there in my first year of photography, I realized, but I don't think I really knew what I was doing with it at the time. But it started off in the PhD thinking about hope. I guess maybe what draws me to Camus and to absurdist philosophy is that revolt that he describes. So it's a little bit different from nihilism in that it's a kind of, so this conscious awakening that he talks about, being aware of the systems of the oppressive structures, for example, just being aware. If we kind of change hope to capitalism or change hope to ideology. So he's saying not to believe in that, but not to anguish over its lack. So how do you live like that? It's a really interesting question. And for me, the idea of colouring in the void is really beautiful. How does that relate to pleasure? I don't know if I might draw a line because you said between pleasure and pressure. Maybe I go there. So one of the things I didn't talk about today, that was another project which is to do with thinking about kind of masochism and feminism, and something about this masochistic pulse. So so I think that relates a little bit to the constraints I was talking about, maybe the pleasures of working within constraints, but also the pleasures of pushing the edges of things. There might be a link there. I know how I can bring it back to the void now. Hang on, wait. So pushing against the limit of the edge of a thing. So how there's a really, gosh, who said it? Jean-Luc Nancy talks about how do we know the void, and we can't know the void. We can only know what pushes against it. So I can only know the edge of my body, where it meets the world, and it all just keeps going on from there. I think that would be my attempt to link the void to the yeah, to the pleasure, to the absurd. Thank you.
Chantal, thank you so much for being here. Like it's just great to have you here, and great to you know, I've run Art Forum here for a few years now, and I think, you know, Lou, your question and you pointing towards this notion of the performative lecture, and it's just this session today has just blurred all of those boundaries, and it's just great to have you here and kind of expand what we know as an art forum and what we know as a lecture and a talk, and you know, really, really thank you for your generosity.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, please join me in thanking Chantal once more.